The great halls of the Zarelian Empire were silent as the bonding ceremony began. Thousands of nobles and warriors gathered in the grand chamber, a massive glowing structure of crystal and energy. The Zarelians were one of the most advanced species in the galaxy, known for their strength, beauty, and mental prowess. But today, there was an air of unease. At the center of the chamber sat Princess Velora, the only heir to the throne. She was dressed in traditional Zarelian royal robes, her silver-white hair flowing over her shoulders. Her eyes, though blank and unfocused, still held a deep intelligence. Unlike other Zarelians, she was born blind and physically weak. To her people, this was an unforgivable flaw. The bonding ceremony was a sacred event. Every Zarelian heir needed to form a telepathic bond with a chosen partner, someone who would strengthen their mind and soul. But as the nobles approached one by one, each stepping forward to offer themselves as a bondmate, they hesitated. One by one, they refused. "I cannot bond with her," said one warrior, stepping back. "She is incomplete. She will never be strong enough to lead," whispered another noble. "I refuse to bond with someone so weak." The words cut deep into Velora's heart, though she had expected them. She had always been an outcast. Since childhood, she had been told that she was unworthy of the throne. Zarelians believed in perfection, strength, agility, and mental superiority. A ruler must be the strongest among them, and Velora, in their eyes, was nothing more than a fragile figure, unfit to lead. Her father, Emperor Zirin, sat on his throne, his expression cold. He had given her this one chance to prove she was worthy. But now, as the last noble refused, his disappointment was clear. "The ceremony is over," the emperor declared, his voice emotionless. "The princess has failed." The nobles murmured in agreement, some shaking their heads, others looking away in pity. Velora, sitting alone in the grand chamber, clenched her fists. She had known this would happen, yet it still hurt. Far away from the palace, on a Zarelian colony outpost, a human named Jonah Carter was busy fixing a damaged energy generator. Jonah was a former Terran diplomat, now working as an engineer for the Zarelian Empire. Unlike other humans who worked for powerful galactic empires, he preferred to keep a low profile, using his skills to solve problems rather than start conflicts. "Jonah, have you heard the news?" asked Drex, a Zarelian worker, as he adjusted the energy conduits. Jonah wiped sweat from his brow and looked up. "News? What news?" "The bonding ceremony. No one bonded with the princess." Drex shook his head. "The council says she's useless." "A mistake." Jonah frowned. "That's harsh, even for Zarelians." Drex shrugged. "She's weak. No one wants a weak leader." Jonah had spent years among alien species, and one thing was always the same. Everyone underestimated humans. Strength wasn't just about muscles or psychic power. It was about resilience, about finding solutions when others saw failure. Later that night, Jonah sat in his small room, looking up at the glowing towers of the Zarelian capital. His mind kept returning to what Drex had said: a princess, abandoned by her own people. He had seen many powerful leaders in his time, but the greatest weren't the strongest. They were the ones who fought against impossible odds. For some reason, he wanted to meet her. And so, the human made a decision that would change the fate of the empire forever. The great capital of the Zarelian Empire shimmered under the twin moons. Towers of crystal and energy pulsed with a soft glow, stretching high into the sky. Jonah Carter walked through the wide streets, his curiosity pushing him forward. He had lived among the Zarelians for years, working as an engineer, but tonight, he was about to do something no human had ever done before. He was going to meet Princess Velora, the rejected heir of the empire. At the palace gates, two tall Zarelian guards in silver armor blocked his path. "No outsiders are allowed," one of them said coldly. "I'm not just an outsider," Jonah replied, crossing his arms. "I work on your colony projects. I've helped fix your energy systems more times than I can count." The guards didn't move. Xyrelians were strict about rules, and the royal palace was not a place where humans were welcomed. "Why do you want to meet the princess?" the second guard asked, narrowing his glowing violet eyes. Jonah took a deep breath. "Because no one else gave her a chance. Because I know what it feels like to be underestimated." But he didn't say that. Instead, he shrugged. "No," Jonah said. "That's your decision. But what if she wasn't the failure? What if they were?" Gasps echoed through the hall. A human insulting the Xyrelian nobles. Unthinkable. Valera clenched her fists. "Father, I bonded with Jonah." The Emperor's eyes flashed with anger. "You bonded with a human?" "Yes." She lifted her chin. "And I can feel his strength, his determination. He is not like the others." Jonah smirked, glad someone finally noticed. The Emperor stood. "This is a disgrace. The nobles will not accept it." "Then let them see," Valera said, stepping forward. "Let them see what I can do." The Emperor hesitated. His daughter had never spoken with such confidence before. Jonah nodded. "Give her a real test. If she fails, I'll walk away. No more arguments." The Emperor's gaze flickered between them. Finally, he spoke. "Very well. But if you fail..." His eyes locked onto Jonah. "I will personally see to it that you are removed from this empire." Jonah grinned. "Fair enough." In the shadows, Vexer clenched his fists. "This human is dangerous. We must act before he ruins everything." Another noble leaned closer. "What do you suggest?" Vexer's eyes gleamed. "We kill him before the trial begins." The palace was silent as Jonah and Valera left the throne room. The tension in the air was heavy. Everyone knew what was coming. Valera had challenged the nobles, the traditions, and even her own father by bonding with Jonah. Now she would have to prove her worth. But neither of them knew that there were those who wanted to stop them before the trial even began. A deadly plot. In the dark halls of the palace, Vexer and his allies gathered. "The Emperor has agreed to test her," one noble whispered. "If she succeeds, the entire system will change. A human will be seen as an equal." Vexer's eyes burned with anger. "That cannot be allowed. The human is the problem." Another noble said, "If he disappears before the trial, the princess will lose her strength." Vexer smirked. "Then let's make sure he never reaches the trial." The plan was simple. Kill the human before sunrise. Jonah's warning. Jonah and Valera walked through the palace corridors. He could feel the weight of her emotions through their bond. "You okay?" he asked. Valera hesitated. "No," she exhaled. "I was raised believing that my future was already decided, that I would always be weak. Now, for the first time, I have a chance, but I don't know if I can win." Jonah placed a hand on her shoulder. "Winning isn't just about being strong. It's about refusing to give up. That's what makes humans different." Valera turned toward him. "Then I will not give up either." Suddenly, Jonah's senses sharpened. A feeling of danger crawled up his spine. His instincts screamed at him. Something was wrong. He grabbed Valera's arm. "We need to leave. Now." Before she could ask why, the sound of footsteps echoed in the corridor. Multiple figures. Then came the sharp hum of energy weapons activating. The assassination attempt. Jonah and Valera turned to see 6 Xyrelian warriors blocking the hallway. Their eyes glowed coldly, their weapons raised. "Jonah Carter," one of them said, "you will not live to see the trial." Valera stepped forward, anger flashing across her face. "You would break the sacred laws to kill him." Vexer emerged from the shadows. "You broke them first." Jonah exhaled. "Yeah, should have seen this coming." The warriors rushed forward. Jonah grabbed Valera and pulled her behind a pillar just as the first energy blast streaked past. He turned, analyzing the situation. 6 enemies. He was unarmed. They had weapons. Bad odds. Jonah grinned. "She's not weak, buddy. You just underestimated her. Valera pushed harder, using her newfound strength. Thalric staggered back. The mighty warrior, the strongest in the Empire, was losing. With a final surge, Valera broke through his mental defenses. Thalric fell to his knees. Silence filled the arena. Then, cheers erupted. The Emperor's judgment. The Emperor studied his daughter, his expression unreadable. Valera stood before him, proud and unshaken. "You have proven your strength," he finally said. "You have done what no one thought possible." The nobles watched, waiting for his decision. The Emperor's eyes flickered toward Jonah. And the human. Valera stepped forward. "He is my bondmate. That will not change." More whispers. A human as a royal bondmate. It was unheard of. Jonah smirked. "Well, Your Majesty, looks like you've got a new kind of history in the making." The Emperor was silent for a long moment. Then, finally, he stood. "The laws of the Empire are clear," he said. "Strength is what matters." He turned toward the gathered nobles. "And today, we have seen true strength." His gaze met Valera's. "You are my heir." The arena erupted in cheers. Valera had won. She was no longer the rejected princess. She was the future ruler of the Zarelian Empire. And she had done it her way. The cheers of the crowd echoed through the grand arena. But Valera barely heard them. She stood tall, her heart pounding, her breath steady. For the first time in her life, she was not the weak princess. She was the rightful heir. Jonah Carter stood beside her, arms crossed, a proud smirk on his face. "Told you. Humans don't believe in impossible." Valera turned her head toward him, her blank silver eyes unreadable, but he felt her confidence through their bond. The Emperor's voice cut through the noise. "The princess has proven her strength," he announced, "and strength must be honored." The crowd quieted. Everyone knew what came next. A new heir was always given the ceremonial blade, the symbol of leadership. But no Zarelian leader had ever bonded with an outsider before. The nobles shifted uncomfortably, uncertain. The Emperor looked down at Valera. "You have won. But you must decide. Will you accept the full responsibility of this throne? Will you stand as heir, knowing that your choice changes everything?" Valera lifted her chin. She had spent her whole life being told she was unworthy, that she would never be strong enough. "No more. I will stand as heir," she declared. The Emperor nodded. He turned to an elder noble, who brought forth an ornate black and silver blade, the Zarelian ceremonial blade. The Emperor took the sword and held it toward her. "Then take this, and seal your claim." Valera reached out and wrapped her fingers around the blade's hilt. At that moment, a pulse of energy shot through her, traveling through her bond with Jonah. It was as if the very air recognized her as the true heir. The crowd erupted in a deafening roar. She had done it. Valera was no longer a forgotten princess. She was the future of the Zarelian Empire. A new beginning. Later that night, Valera and Jonah stood on the balcony of the palace, overlooking the glowing city. Jonah leaned against the railing. "So, what now, Your Highness?" Valera sighed, the cool night breeze brushing against her skin. "Now, I change everything." Jonah chuckled. "Big task." She tilted her head. "You doubt me?" "Not for a second," Jonah said. "I've seen what you can do." Valera listened, fascinated. Her own people had never told her such things. "Where I come from," Jonah said, "strength isn't just about what you can do physically. It's about what's in here." He tapped his temple. "And what's in here?" He touched his chest. Valera tilted her head. "That is, not the Zarelian way." "Maybe it should be." A flicker of something, curiosity, hope, appeared in Valera's expression. "Do you really believe I could be more than what they say I am?" Jonah met her gaze, even though he knew she couldn't see him. "I know you can." Silence stretched between them. For the first time in her life, someone believed in her. Suddenly, the air in the room shifted. A soft hum vibrated in Jonah's mind, like a quiet whisper brushing against his thoughts. Jonah blinked. Oh, what's happening? Valera's breath hitched. You can feel that. Feel what? The connection. Valera's fingers curled against the table. Zarelian's bond through mental resonance. When we open our minds to another, we create a link, a shared connection of thoughts and emotions. Jonah rubbed the back of his neck. Okay. And this is happening now. Valera looked almost afraid. It shouldn't be. Jonah raised an eyebrow. Why not? Because, she swallowed. No Zarelian has ever bonded with a human before. Jonah let out a slow breath. Well, guess we just broke a record. Valera's pulse quickened. This was impossible. Zarelians had spent centuries perfecting their mental discipline, choosing only the strongest to bond with. Humans weren't even supposed to be capable of it. Yet here Jonah was, a human whose mind was somehow reaching hers. The moment stretched, and then, a rush of emotions hit Valera like a storm. For the first time in her life, she felt something beyond her own world. She sensed Jonah's determination, his kindness, his belief in her. She could see glimpses of his memories, the bright blue sky of Earth, the laughter of his friends, the struggles he had faced. And then something even more shocking happened. For a brief moment, just 1 second, Valera could see, not through her own eyes, but through Jonah's mind. She gasped and nearly stumbled back. Jonah reached out instinctively, grabbing her wrists to steady her. The moment their skin touched, the bond grew stronger. Valera's voice trembled. I saw something. Jonah frowned. What do you mean? I saw through your mind. She placed a hand over her chest, her heart pounding. Jonah, this shouldn't be possible. Jonah exhaled. Well, I've been told humans tend to break the rules of the universe now and then. Valera gave a shaky laugh. It was the first time in years she had laughed without sadness. But deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. Meanwhile, outside the palace, the emperor's personal guard stood watch, unaware of the historic moment happening inside. But in the shadows, a group of Zarelian nobles whispered among themselves. The human is dangerous, one hissed. He's interfering with royal matters, another muttered. If the princess bonds with him, it could change everything. Their leader, a noble named Vexer, narrowed his eyes. Then we cannot allow it to happen. In that moment, a plan was set into motion. A plan to eliminate Jonah Carter. The palace halls were quiet, but Jonah Carter could feel the tension in the air. Something had changed between him and Princess Valera, something no Zarelian had expected. They had bonded, but humans had won against worse odds before. The human fights back. Jonah grabbed a small metal torch from the nearby wall and threw it at one of the attackers, hitting him in the face. The Zarelian stumbled back, giving Jonah an opening. He rushed forward, slamming his fist into the warrior's ribs, knocking the weapon from his grip. Another attacker swung at Jonah, but he ducked and countered with a punch to the jaw. Valera, feeling his movements through their bond, reacted instinctively. She closed her eyes and reached out with her mind. Suddenly, one of the attackers froze in place, gripping his head in confusion. What is this? He gasped. Jonah didn't wait. He grabbed the stunned warrior and threw him into another attacker. Vexer snarled. Enough of this. He raised his energy weapon, aiming directly at Jonah's heart. The princess awakens. Valera's mind exploded with energy. Her connection with Jonah had unlocked something inside her, a power she had never felt before. As Vexer pulled the trigger, Valera raised her hand. A shockwave of invisible force burst from her mind, sending Vexer and the other attackers flying backward. Jonah stumbled but caught himself. Okay, that was new. Valera's breathing was heavy, but her face was calm and determined. Vexer groaned from the floor. Impossible. She's too weak. Valera stepped toward him. I am not weak. She turned to Jonah. "Let's go. The trial is waiting." Jonah smirked. "Now you're really thinking like a human." Together, they left the battered assassins behind. The princess had awakened, and soon the entire empire would know it. The grand Zarelian arena was unlike anything Jonah had ever seen. The structure, made of glowing blue crystal, pulsed with energy, and thousands of nobles and warriors filled the seats, waiting for the trial to begin. The air was tense. Everyone knew that today was different. This was no ordinary trial. Princess Velara, the blind and rejected heir, would face a test. If she failed, she would be banished forever. If she succeeded, she would rewrite the rules of the empire. Jonah stood beside her, feeling the weight of the moment. "You ready?" Velara took a deep breath. "No, but I will not run." Jonah smirked. "That's all that matters." From the high throne, Emperor Zirin watched with cold eyes. The nobles whispered among themselves, still shocked that the princess had bonded with a human. Vexer, bandaged and still recovering from the failed assassination attempt, glared from the side. He had lost his chance to eliminate Jonah, but he still believed the princess would fail. "The trial begins now," the emperor announced. "The test of the mind." A massive warrior stepped forward. His name was Commander Thalric, the strongest Zarelian telepath. He was known for breaking minds in battle, crushing enemies without lifting a single weapon. Velara would have to face him in a duel of the mind. Thalric smirked. "A blind, weak princess. This will be over quickly." Velara stood tall. "We'll see." The emperor raised his hand. "Begin." The mental duel. Thalric launched his attack, sending a wave of psychic energy toward Velara. The force was enough to make even trained warriors fall to their knees. But Velara did not fall. Instead, she stood firm, feeling Jonah's presence in her mind. "I am not alone." The bond between them strengthened her. Instead of fighting Thalric's power head-on, she absorbed it, redirecting it back. Thalric's eyes widened. What? For the first time in his life, his power was being matched. The nobles gasped. The emperor leaned forward in his throne. A pause. Velara's voice softened. "You helped me see what I could be, Jonah. Without you, I might have never fought back." Jonah smirked. "Nah, you had it in you the whole time. You just needed someone to remind you." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Their bond was stronger than ever, their minds connected in a way no Zarelian and human had ever experienced. Velara turned toward him. "Stay." Jonah blinked. "Ha." She took a step closer. "Stay in the Empire. Help me change things." Jonah hesitated. He had always been a wanderer, never staying in one place for too long. But as he looked at Velara, the princess who had defied fate, who had become more than anyone expected, he realized something. This was his place now. He grinned. "All right, Your Highness. Let's shake up the galaxy." Velara smiled. Together. And for the first time in Zarelian history, a human stood beside the heir of the empire, not as a servant, not as a stranger, but as an equal. Epilogue. A whisper in the shadows, but not everyone was pleased with the outcome. In the farthest corner of the palace, Vexer stood with a handful of nobles, their faces dark with anger. "The empire cannot be ruled by a weakling," one of them muttered. "She is no longer weak," Vexer spat. "And that is the problem." Another noble shook his head. "And the human? What will we do about him?" Vexer's eyes burned with hatred. "The emperor may have accepted him, but not all of us will." A cold silence settled over them. They would not forget, and they would not forgive. Far away, unaware of the danger still lurking, Velara and Jonah looked to the stars. A new future had begun. But a storm was coming. "I just want to talk." The guards looked at each other. One of them let out a sharp breath before pressing a small communicator on his wrist. Moments later, an answer came. The Emperor has no interest in entertaining visitors, the voice said. Send him away. Jonah sighed. He expected that. He would have to find another way. Inside the palace, Princess Valera sat in her dark chamber. The bonding ceremony had ended in disaster. She had known it would, but knowing didn't make it hurt any less. She traced her fingers over the smooth surface of the table beside her. Xyrelians were a people of mental strength, of power and dominance. But what about those who were different? What about those who couldn't fight, but could still think, feel, and lead? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on her door. "Who is it?" she asked, expecting a servant. Instead, a voice she didn't recognize spoke, a voice different from any Xyrelian she had ever heard. "My name is Jonah Carter," the voice said. "I'm a human." Valera's brow furrowed. "A human. Here." "Go away," she said. "I just want to talk," Jonah replied. "You don't have to let me in. I'll talk from here." Valera hesitated. Humans were rare in the Empire. She had never met one before. Slowly, she reached out with her telepathic sense, feeling for his presence. Xyrelians communicated through mental connections, but when she tried to sense Jonah's mind, she felt something strange. Unlike her people, his thoughts were not rigid, not controlled by layers of discipline and power. Instead, they were messy, alive, filled with curiosity and determination. She had never felt anything like it before. Outside, Jonah waited. He wasn't sure if she would answer, but then the door unlocked. He stepped inside carefully. The room was dim, filled with soft blue light from the walls. Valera sat in the center, her silver hair flowing over her shoulders. Though she couldn't see him, she turned her head toward him, sensing his presence. "You are different," she said. "Your mind is strange." Jonah smiled. "I'll take that as a compliment." She tilted her head. "Why are you here, human?" Jonah thought for a moment. Then he said, "Because no one else gave you a chance." Valera's fingers curled into her robe. "And what do you think you can do?" "I am useless to my people." "I don't believe that," Jonah said firmly. "And I don't think you do either." Silence stretched between them. For the first time in years, someone was speaking to her like she mattered. "Then prove it," she whispered. Jonah nodded. "All right. Let's start with something simple. Tell me, what do you want?" For the first time in her life, Valera had no answer. And for the first time, hope flickered in her heart. Valera sat silently, her pale fingers tracing patterns on the table before her. The presence of a human in her chamber felt strange, almost unreal. She had grown up surrounded by Xyrelians who saw her as a burden, an unwanted heir. Yet here was this human, Jonah Carter, speaking to her like she mattered. Jonah leaned forward slightly, his voice calm. "You never answered my question," he said. "What do you want, Valera?" The princess hesitated. No one had ever asked her that before. Her life had been decided for her, a future of loneliness, rejection, and silence. "I don't know," she admitted finally. Jonah nodded. "That's fair." He leaned back in his chair. "But you must want something, even if it seems impossible." Valera exhaled slowly. "I suppose I want to be seen, not as a mistake, not as a weakling, just as me." Jonah smiled. "That's a good start." For the next hour, they talked. Jonah told her about Earth, about human stories of resilience and survival. He spoke about blind human leaders, scientists, and warriors who changed history despite their limitations. Jonah still wasn't sure what that truly meant, but the connection between them was real. He could feel Valera's emotions, her thoughts brushing against his mind like a gentle whisper. She could sense his presence, even without sight. It should have been impossible, but humans were good at making the impossible happen. Valera sat on the edge of her chair, trying to steady her breathing. "You're afraid," Jonah said. She exhaled. "Wouldn't you be?" "Maybe, but why are you afraid?" Valera hesitated before speaking. Because this bond, it should not exist. Jonah shrugged. Maybe it should. She turned toward him. You don't understand, Jonah. Xyrelian bonds are sacred. They define our strength, our leadership, our survival. Her fingers tightened around the armrest. If the nobles find out I bonded with a human, they will not accept it. Jonah leaned forward. And why should they decide your fate? Valera was silent. No one had ever questioned her people's rules before. She had spent her whole life accepting that she was unworthy, a failure. But Jonah saw her differently. She took a deep breath. It doesn't matter what I want. The Emperor, my father, will never allow this. Jonah studied her for a moment. Then we make him listen. Valera laughed bitterly. That's impossible. Jonah grinned. Funny thing about humans, we don't believe in impossible. Meanwhile, in the palace courtyard, a group of Xyrelian nobles gathered in secret. Their leader, Vexer, paced the marble floor, his violet eyes burning with anger. The human is a threat, he said. The princess bonding with him is an insult to our traditions. The emperor will not allow it. Another noble said. He will end it. Vexer's expression darkened. What if he doesn't? The human must be removed before this becomes a problem. A silence settled over them. They had made their decision. Back in Valera's chamber, Jonah stood and stretched. All right, time to fix this mess. Valera frowned. Fix? How do you plan to do that? I'm going to talk to your father. Valera's eyes widened. Jonah, you don't understand. The emperor does not negotiate. If you go to him, he might. Jonah smirked. Yeah, I've heard that before. If you do this, you'll get hurt. If you take a risk, you'll fail. He shook his head. But guess what? Humans never stop trying. Valera stared at him, unsure whether he was insane or brilliant. For the first time in her life, someone was fighting for her. Fine, she said at last. But I'm coming with you. Jonah raised an eyebrow. Thought you said it was dangerous. She lifted her chin. If this is my future, I have to fight for it too. Jonah grinned. Now you're thinking like a human. The confrontation. The throne room was massive, with golden pillars stretching toward the sky. Emperor Xirin sat upon his high seat, his gaze cold and unreadable as Jonah and Valera approached. The nobles lined the sides, whispering among themselves. Many of them glared at Jonah, their disapproval clear. Jonah stopped in the center of the room, arms crossed. We need to talk. The emperor's eyes narrowed. A human dares to demand an audience with me. Jonah shrugged. Well, yeah. That's how talking works. A ripple of shock and outrage passed through the nobles. No one had ever spoken to the emperor like that. Valera stepped forward. Father, Silence. The emperor's voice was sharp. He turned his gaze to Jonah. You do not belong here. Jonah met his eyes. Funny. That's what everyone's been telling her too. The emperor's expression darkened. The bonding ceremony was meant to prove her worth. She failed. The nobles refused her. That is the end of it.